Chapter 7. Another Challenge. At the pilot's facetious request, many of the passengers in the cabin of the launch began to laugh. Others were angry that they were stranded in the middle of Lake Nahuel Huapi. "There is no excuse for this," said one woman. "We may have a long wait before help comes," another burst out. Although Nancy said nothing, inside she was fuming with impatience and thinking, this is the only boat going to the Arajanes forest today. If it doesn't run, we'll never be able to make the trip because we have to fly back to Lima tomorrow. George was mumbling, "We may miss an important clue to solving the mystery of the Crossword Cipher." The Englishman, with whom the girls had made friends, suddenly stood up. He walked forward and climbed the ladder into the pilot's compartment. His wife, Mrs. Horace, told the girls that he was an engineer. She said he thought something other than lack of fuel might be the trouble with the launch. "Oh, I hope he's right," said Bess. "And I hope he can fix it," George added. Carla sighed. "From the very beginning of this case, we have had nothing but setbacks," she said dolefully. Nancy patted her friend's hand. "We'll get out of this." Presently, the engineer called to Carla, asking her to come to the pilot's cabin. "This man speaks very little English," he said. "Would you mind translating for me?" Carla said she would be glad to do so and rapidly told the pilot that the Englishman was an engineer and would like to make an inspection of the engines. The pilot shrugged and told him to go ahead. The engine room was under the pilot's compartment. A door led below. It began to rain, and people who had been on the aft deck crowded into the cabin. They asked what was causing the delay. "I wish we knew," Mrs. Horace replied. Nancy and her friends watched as Mr. Horace examined wires and pipes. Presently he requested Carla to translate for him again. "Tell the pilot that I'm sure the launch is not out of fuel. I think the fuel line is clogged. Can he clean it out himself?" When the skipper heard this, a broad grin crossed his face and he said rapidly, "Yes, I can clean it." At once he went to work. Shortly the passengers were relieved to hear the engine sputter, then start up with a steady throb. "Olé!" cried the Spanish passengers. "Yeah! Woohoo! Yeah!" the English-speaking ones shouted. The first stop on the trip was Victoria Island. Here the tourists climbed a hill to a delightful hotel, where they had a tasty lunch which included huge slices of homemade bread. As Bess reached for her third piece, George grabbed her cousin's arm. "No, you don't," she said. Meekly, Bess put the slice of bread back into the basket and finished her salad. Soon after lunch, the travelers assembled at the dock and once more started off. The rain had slackened to a drizzle, and by the time they reached the peninsula, the sun was shining. "Doesn't the forest look enchanting?" Bess said, gazing toward the pinkish-yellow growth of trees ahead. The girls hurried from the dock, but before entering the forest, stopped to examine a large round plaque nailed to a tree. "Oh, could this be a clue?" Carla asked excitedly. The circular piece of Arajanes wood was a little bigger than the Ponce's plaque. There was an inscription on it, which Carla translated. "Trees are man's good friends. Do not wound them." "How poetic," Bess murmured. As the girls skirted the beach, which was covered by loose rocks and stones of various sizes, they looked intently into the most amazing woods they had ever seen. "It's like a fairyland," said Nancy. The enormously high trees grew straight up, but not as single units. Several trunks rose from a common base, and each one in turn had more upward branching limbs. The trees had no bark. George ran her hand over the wood. Smooth as satin." "It's the color of evergreen wood," Nancy said, "but these trees don't have needles." She gazed at the thick, small-leafed foliage which grew high overhead. "It's so peaceful here," Bess murmured as she stepped over a tree root which had grown above ground. It trailed for some distance, then disappeared into the ground near another tree. How strange! One of the tourists near her, who had overheard the conversation, said, "I understand these roots run a long way and start forming a new tree. Probably there's a network of roots under this forest." Nancy gazed all around. "Actually," she said, "these so-called trees are more like gigantic bushes. Maybe they once were bushes for diplodocuses to feed on." "Diplo who?" Bess asked. "Plant-eating dinosaurs," Nancy explained with a smile. George grinned. "Can't you just see one of them rubbing himself on this nice smooth bark and reaching up to eat the leaves? But tell me, did they have those monsters in South America as well as North America?" Nancy laughed. "You can't prove anything by me," she said. Presently, the girls passed a small, attractive log cabin where they assumed the guard for this government preserve lived. Nancy suggested that on the way back they stop and talk to him. Some 20 minutes later, they rapped on the cabin door. It was opened by a pleasant, middle-aged man. When Nancy told him she would like to ask a few questions about the forest, he invited the girls inside. They introduced themselves, and the guard said, "My name is Romero. What can I tell you?" Nancy took Carla's plaque from its wrapping and showed it to him. He examined the curio with interest. "This is very old. Too bad the markings aren't plainer. Have you any idea what they mean?" "No, and that's why I brought it along to show you. We understand it is made of Aragonés wood and is about 300 years old. Have you any records here to show who might have been in this vicinity at that time?" Romero shook his head. "I imagine it was pretty wild, but whether or not anybody ever lived here, I have never heard." Carla said she had an ancient ancestor by the name of Aguilar, who presumably had carved the plaque. No one has ever figured out its significance, but now we girls are trying to do so. The guard showed interest and asked if she could tell him any more about her ancestor. He was supposed to have been an excellent artist and an adventurer, Carla replied. I suppose he traveled around a great deal. Romero said that he knew of one person who might possibly help the girls, but he does not live around here. He is an old man, a full-blood Inca Indian who lives in Cuzco, Peru. He knows more stories and legends about the history of all of South America than anybody I have ever heard of. Nancy realized that Cuzco was many miles from Lima. Could this Indian offer enough help to make a trip there worthwhile? As if in answer to her unspoken question, Romero went on. Even if Mapani cannot help you on your mystery, you girls certainly should visit Cuzco while you are in South America. Some of the original walls of the ruined city are still standing, and nearby there are several other great ruins, a fortress in particular. I'd love to see it, and also meet Mapani, said Nancy. I have a hunch he can help us. The guard said he knew the old Indian would be glad to see them. With a twinkle in his eyes, Romero added, Mapani will probably say to you, Munanki, Emainan Kaskianki? That is not Spanish, Carla said. What does it mean? Romero laughed. It is the old Inca language, Quechua. It means, hello, how are you? The girls repeated the phrase several times. Then Nancy asked how they should reply. You will say, Hukla Yusul Peki. The visitors groaned. I'll never be able to learn that, Bess declared. What does it mean? It means good, thank you. And Kutimune Kikama means goodbye. While Nancy and Carla were trying to memorize the three phrases, George walked around the cabin. On one wall, she noticed a bunch of knotted strings of various colors tied together and suspended from several nails. She asked what it was. That is called a quipu, Romero said. It was the way the old Incas kept records. They did not have a written language or a way of figuring. I will show you how this works. He explained that the different colored cords stood for various things. For instance, a red string could indicate the king, and the knots on that particular string might indicate how many wives and children he had. The old Inca rulers and their nobles were polygamists. But the common people weren't? No. Each laborer, called a prioric, was allowed only one wife. George reached up and counted the knots, some of which were single, others doubled, or in groups. It would be beyond me, she said, to figure this out. I guess that old king had a mighty big family. The guard told the girls that scholars were still working on the puzzle of the quipu. If they could learn the meaning of the knots, they might figure out some of the history of the Incas which was not yet known. At that moment, the girls heard a boat horn and knew they were being summoned to the launch. They thanked the guard for the interesting visit and said they must hurry off. As they were leaving, Romero said, "While you are in Cuzco, be sure to go on to Machu Picchu. That is even more of a mystery than Cuzco. Nobody knows what it looked like when it was a city. That is another puzzle for you to solve, Miss Drew." Nancy smiled. "Another challenge," she said gaily. Bess groaned. "Nancy, you have enough challenges already." The girls said goodbye to the guard and hurried off through the forest. The launch's horn sounded again. As they approached the beach, George suddenly pointed ahead and shouted, "Look out, everybody!" Hurtling toward them was a large stone. As they ducked, the rock whizzed overhead and hit a tree with a resounding thud. The next moment it ricocheted and struck Nancy a stinging blow on the back. Stunned, she teetered for a moment, then toppled over. End of chapter 7.